for joining for the online scavenger hunt. So part of it, we will be looking at things that I've collected, and as well, you can save the document so you can complete it later. So it's quite kind of child friendly or all age friendly. So wanted to, when we start to, it is an idea to go out on the land if you want to come to Maplewood Flats to do this, but you can also complete it from home wherever you are or in your neighborhood. It's kind of an idea of plants that you'd be able to find maybe near your home, or at least hopefully be able to walk even to a nearby park and have plants that you can, that are mostly plants that are indigenous plants to here, but as well as plants that you might be able to find kind of quite easily is a big idea of it. So mostly the idea when we're starting off to look at the indigenous community and think about the land and the water. So part of looking at one of the first parts, not only do we kind of start off by thinking about the land acknowledgement about being, depending on which area you are, unceded Coast Salish territories, specifically if you're in Vancouver or in Maplewood Flats, we're in North Vancouver. Often we just hear unceded Coast Salish territory. So there's a lot of education to happen for the public, because it's not, it's never been taught in public schools, a real history about whose each nation, city is, and different districts go over. So it's really good. I know there's the website Whose Land, and so you can look at even your neighborhood or the city or district that you live in, and it can give you more information to look further about the specific nation, different languages. So I'll give you part of the first two questions is looking at, for the North Shore at least, we have the Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish nations. And so I'm from the Squamish Nation. And so the two nations we speak, the Scohomish Snatcham and the Hunkaminam, these are Coast Salish languages. So when we're looking at the first two, it's important to go further than just looking at our individual nations, but looking further that there's a very unique and rich history and the relationship with the land. One of the sayings from a very respected elder, Vanessa Campbell, is that we don't own property, we don't own land, but it's our belief that that we're the safekeepers, or we're the ones tending to the land, so that our future generations, that they have the same access and that same relationship with plants and with the land that we have had since time immemorial. For the landscape for those future generations. And so whether you're sitting outside right now or you are watching it to continue on later, one of the teachings that had been shared with me with looking at respecting nature is that we want to look at how we respect rocks as being grandfathers. So we're not just seeing plants and part of the landscape as inanimate objects, rather that we see rocks as grandfathers, and we see plants and trees as grandmothers. So having that deeper respect, instead of seeing it as a kind of a useless item, really seeing that these are beings much older than the human species is whatsoever. So having that same respect that you do for people, as well for when you're going out into nature, having that idea that when we're looking at the plants and trees as beings or as ancestors, we're never alone, especially going outside. It's like having our ancestors or your grandparents or loved ones, even the ones that you've lost, are with you. So it's really a special way to connect to those, especially right now that we can't go and see, even if it's people who have passed away. So that's a really important part of having the connection with rocks and with plants. And so all of the plants have different kinds of gifts. So it's whether we can build up that appreciation to see what the different plants, just as humans, we all have our own gifts, understanding that trees and plants, they all have special, unique ways that they work in the world. And maybe we have a certain plant that we might notice. I recommend if you're going out for a walk, try to look around and see your surroundings and see if there's a plant or a flower or even a tree, if there's anything that really calls out to you. And so sometimes once you start to notice a plant more and more, you'll actually, if you do a little bit more research into what that plant is, there are sometimes ways that those plants are following you. Instead of you following the plants, they're actually trying to share teachings with you. So it's a really nice way to look at how to understand. It can be a little bit overwhelming at first if you have an excitement for learning about plants. Maybe there's just many different areas that you're wanting to look into. So I do recommend, just when you're out for a walk, see which kind of plants you might notice and they call out to you. So it's really wonderful if you try to build that idea of just picking one or two plants, and then you can build a big more time to focus on which certain plants might be. Maybe it's whether you need mint to help calm down, or just looking at what kind of properties and values plants have, and they're ones that will be nearby you. So we've covered on the first two if you're in the North Shore, but again, I do encourage to research further. And a lot of different nations now have something like a map or an interactive way that you can look at village names or place names. So sometimes we have a kind of a landmark as a place name rather than it being specifically a village. We also have seasonal villages. So for Coast Salish people, I do recommend, for the Squamish Nation, you can go to Squamish Atlas, and that's from an organization, Kwiat Stalmoch, which is bringing the language, conversational Squamish language spoken. So that's a really wonderful resource, not only to look at whose land you are within, but there's a lot of knowledge, and you can hear voice recordings of our village sites and our landmark, our place names throughout the city and within our territory, from Gibsons and the Squamish Valley into Vancouver and around the North Shore. I know Musqueam has a similar setup on their website. If you just go to the Musqueam's website, you can find kind of an interactive map as well that shows the different place names. So I highly, highly encourage people to look up not only which nation you're living within the territory of, but if their nation's website has any information. Again, it's really not taught in schools enough yet, from an indigenous perspective rather than from a colonial perspective. And a warning, you'll see my pets running by, so don't mind them. And so it is really something I highly encourage the public to be able to go on to, even just Google, go to a search engine and find a different, the nation that you're from, living within the territory. And there's ways that you can see, like, such as with the Squamish Nation, looking at, you might know you're in the nation, in the village of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people, but the further you can go and see specifically, maybe, for example, a different area or a park downtown. Today is, you see it as a park to go visit and hang out in, but looking at a place name or a small history that it shows on there about more of a cultural connection of the history we have with that landscape as Coast Salish people. So that's what I wanted to kind of focus, to bring us kind of in the same mindset and understandings about when we're going out into nature, seeing the ways that we can respect the plants and respect different parts of the landscape that we're within. So first I have just picked some examples. So these are ones that we can find relatively easily during August and July, so summer months. These are the ones that we're looking at are relatively, for the most part, seasonal. So we can do maybe different sectional seasonal episodes or kind of sessions for the scavenger hunts. So if you do have questions, feel free. I don't mind if you guys want to show your camera if you're comfortable. Of course, we know muting so we can all hear, but then it would be nice if any of you feel comfortable to put your camera on, then I can see your lovely faces, not just my screen. So I will change now to focus on my camera so that we can look at the plants that I have. And then we can go back at any time to the, to look at the paper version. So I'm just going to stop sharing. So we'll focus mostly on myself. Okay, there we go. So for the first part, we'll be looking at a focus of blackberries. So many people are probably familiar with the Himalayan blackberry. I just went and picked these from my yard. So these are two different kinds of blackberries. So they're not really hard, they're a little bit soft. So this one is kind of a smaller branch, but this one is from the Himalayan, which is the invasive blackberry. So for the most part of the indigenous species, there's 3 different berries that are quite related in their use and in the way they have their appearance. So another kind of one part I didn't put on the PDF sheet, but something to think about when looking at plants, and if you have your interest in learning what they're used for. That's kind of a phrase, the doctrine of signatures. So it's talking about ways that plants have things, whether it's colors, shapes, textures, things that can be similar to the human body. So for colors, it can be things of red, yellow, even purples with similar to the reds. And so there's different ways that plants can have a way to communicate. So it's not only thinking about plants and animals, rocks, they may not speak with human languages, but visually there's communications that we can tell what the plant can be used for. Again, shapes, colors, textures. So this is something that can be really shared in a broad way. So even from childhood, people can learn about plants in a simple way that can be focusing on just starting off with the color and then kind of going higher to different levels of what you want to learn about them. So the reason we're looking at the shape first with the blackberry. So the trailing blackberry, they are related to the raspberries and to salmon berries. So when we're looking at the shape for the indigenous species, so we're not talking about the invasive blackberry right now, the Himalayan blackberry. But if you see right now this shape, I'll just put it close up to my camera. So you can see the shape of the 3 leaves together. And so on the whole trailing vine, similar with raspberries and similar with salmon berries, we have the shape of the 3 leaves together. So that can be looking at different ways that numbers, textures, shapes, that they can help be a way to identify plants. If you ever see, often there are plants where there are maybe 2 plants that look very similar, in which case one is the one you want, and then one is kind of, my little nickname is the evil twin. So sometimes plants have a good plant that you want to use that are healthy and medicinal uses, and then sometimes there's one that is a little bit, it can be toxic, it can be poisonous. There's many different ways where it looks similar, but you don't want to get the wrong one. So within Maplewood Flats, we can definitely find yarrow, and I've seen this in many other, in nature, in the wild, where you have the tansy growing beside it. So tansy and yarrow are one example where we use yarrow medicinally, and tansy is very toxic and poisonous. It's not one that we want to use. Another one, Labrador tea. I don't know the name of the plant actually. Right now I can't remember. But there's a plant that grows next to Labrador tea. They grow in bogs. And then there's one that will grow even really right beside it. And that one is quite toxic and it's not safe to use. So there can be often only a slight little difference where you can look at the color, shapes, textures, where you'll be able to tell you have the right plant and not their kind of, my little nickname, the evil twin. So with the with the blackberry family, luckily for us, the Himalayan blackberries are not really like toxic or poisonous. It's just that they can be kind of endangered to other plants in the ecosystem. So luckily for humans, it's not like we're going to get poisoned if we pick the invasive species, but it does require a lot of labor and a lot of work to try to remove those plants because they can grow quite quickly and grow back, and then they can really take over an ecosystem where there can be delicate plants that are indigenous to there. So now when we see side by side, this is the indigenous kind. So the reason the number 3 is important, again, so with the raspberries, sandberries, and blackberry, you can see the 3 leaves together. So if we're looking at the human anatomy, so this plant is used for everybody. It's really good for your muscles. So it's in some ways we don't call it a painkiller, but a muscle strengthener. So when we have the leaves, you can drink them fresh or you can dry them to save for later. But for women specifically, so myself, when I was pregnant, I would drink this because it helps strengthen the muscle in your body, the womb. So all muscles, whether it's your arms or legs or back muscles, if you're sore, this is a really wonderful one. If you get to go out for a nice walk, this is a really good one if you're sore the next day to help your muscles strengthen. So this is one we want to try to look at having trailing blackberry, salmonberry, and raspberry. They have all the same properties for their leaves. And these are ones that are really wonderful to drink it as a tea. It actually does have quite a nice taste. And so the ones that we think of as, again, not a painkiller, but a muscle strengthener. And so now when we're looking at that shape of 3, again, this plant is for everybody, but for women, if you're looking at that shape, it's a little bit similar to our reproductive. And it's really not only safe, but it's very beneficial for the different stages of women's bodies. So for pregnancy, breastfeeding, menopause, it's really even menstrual cramps. The reason it really helps for cramps or even postpartum is that it helps the muscle of the uterine muscle for contractions or cramping. It helps to strengthen so it's not kind of straining and weak when you're having those pains. So it's a really wonderful one. Quite simple to make it as a tea. And it is one you can kind of gather it so you can have it fresh when it's ready, mostly in the spring and summer, but also to have it preserved so it's quite year round, that you can save a lot to have for the winter. I know for the raspberries, the leaves will, they pretty much kind of same with the others, the salmonberry, you will lose the leaves seasonally. So it is good that you want to, after the berry season, to collect all the leaves, and then you can dry them out and save them for kind of drinking them throughout the winter and spring months when they're not season ended, before the whole plant kind of withers into the fall and winter. So then you're kind of maximizing, the plant wants to keep its leaves when the berries are out for a little bit of shade and sun movement, but still picking it before the season is over. And then when we're looking now, so telling the difference between the invasive and the indigenous species of the blackberries, I had mentioned the 3 leaf shape. So another thing my mom I learned when I was doing a workshop with my mom, she was showing children for the top 2 leaves, if you're kind of just pinching the top, they kind of have this nice little butterfly or kind of bug shape. So that can be a fun activity as well, going outside, looking at how you can, before you pick the plant though, we always, in Squamish, we say hoichucha or haichka, or in whatever language, you can say a thank you. So in some ways, when we're picking a leaf or a plant or a berry, it is important to say thank you and speak to the plant. Like I said, plants speak to us, and we can speak back to them. So if we don't think they're hearing because they don't have ears, so most plants don't have ears, some do. So you can think of having that, not seeing them as an inanimate object, but really looking at how we can kind of see them as its own entity as well. and having those respect or even a friendship, thanking the plant can go a long way about building your comfort or building your relationship being in nature, being on the land. So that's fun, a little activity. Little kids might probably enjoy that. So showing that little nice fun part of the, and the fun thing with the blackberry, they do have some prickles, but if you see the back of the blackberry invasive, they have much bigger thorns. So that's kind of a reason too why the indigenous species is not as gigantic thorns. So you can do that. With the invasive, you wouldn't want to have kids touch the back because the entire stem right up to the leaves even have got those thorny prickles. So you would not want to kind of play with the invasive species leaves. It could be very scratchy. And so now for so that's the part of the leaf identification, was that there are 3. Now, if you compare them, the blackberry is, the indigenous species is much darker. It's got a darker shade of green, and the invasive species will usually have a very white underneath side. This one does not. They sometimes have a little bit lighter, but it's not quite as white as the invasive kind. So those leaf shape, that these ones are smaller, they're darker, and there's only 3 of them. And the invasive, you can see that there is a 5. So this one has 5 instead of 3. If you look at the bottom, it looks the same, but then you'll notice the top, they've got 2 extra ones. So the Himalayan, or the invasive to here, it has 5 leaves. The stems can be very thick. They can grow very tall. The trailing, like its name, it'll go very low to the ground. So you might not even see it. The only way it goes high is if it starts to grow on top of a plant, and then it just kind of grows over top and then goes back down again. So you won't see it really sticking straight up. So those are some of the ways you're wanting to make sure you identify the difference. These ones grow very tall, very thick, and the trailing blackberry, it's quite thin, the stem. Even if it's a very old or mature plant, it won't have a gigantic thick stem. It'll be thin. The invasive will have usually red or green tinges in their stem. The indigenous species, the trailing blackberry, will have usually does still have a green stem, a little bit red, but mostly what you will notice is that it has a silver or a blue tinge to it. So it's almost like it's like a frosted color if you look at them next to each other. This will have red or just green. This one, green still, maybe tiny streaks of red, but you can see this kind of silver frosting, or a kind of blue sky, kind of blue to gray dust or frosting to it, I guess. So those are some of the ways, if you see them when they're still a small plant earlier on in the spring, those are some of the ways to notice is that blue or gray tinge, that these are dark green, not a light green, and they're very small thorns, and it's a very thin stem. So even looking at comparison of these 2 stems of just the leaf alone, you can really see it's at least double, if not more. So it's quite a difference when they get on full bloom in the summertime. And then another note with the blackberries for the month of August, within the Squamish languages, like many other indigenous languages, for the months of the year, we refer to them as a moon, and often we're referring to different things that are observed within our ecosystem. So for the month of August, we call it Tumquelmuch or Tumsquelmuch, and that's talking about the indigenous blackberry is when you'll be seeing the berries ripening for the blackberries. So the moon, or the month of August, is the one that you're seeing the blackberries being ripening. So if you want to take a look out for the different blackberries, I know the invasive ones definitely are already ripening, but the indigenous species, you'll notice they're very small. So if you had I actually have some photos of the blackberry invasive and indigenous species, and the blackberries of the invasive are at least maybe a few inches big, whereas the trailing blackberry, it's probably like kind of small, like maybe like a pinky nail size, so it's really tiny. And so those are some of the ways when you want to go to further identify these different plants. Those are ways you can identify them and see that they're two different species. Sometimes it's very hard to find the trailing blackberry. Many parks within the area, well, some of the larger, older parks that are not quite as urbanized now. So in the North Shore, Case Park, Maplewood Flats, in Vancouver, Stanley Park, or Pacific Spirit Park. I've definitely seen trails that you can find the trailing blackberry growing even right beside a path. So you don't have to kind of dig far in the forest. You can see them right, kind of growing right onto the pathways in some of those parks. So we're going to go next. Our next point will be looking at frogleaf. So these are really wonderful, and there's 3 different ways that I want to have you be able to identify them. So going forward, you will know in kind of a nice one, 3 easy steps looking at how you can remember. So these are 2 different kinds of plantain. Often this is the one, we call it common plantain or frogleaf. And so when we're looking at the stems, I'll just put the stems close to the camera. So can you all see those little kind of fibers or strings sticking out beyond the leaf? So that is the first point of looking at the frogleaf or the plantain. I don't know if this is just called, I think it's just maybe tall plantain. We don't have rattlesnake plantain in these ecosystems. That one's not related to these. Just if when we hear plantain, there's kind of multiple different plants that are containing the name, but are very different and different than the kind of banana-looking plantains as well. So with these plantains or frogleafs, we start off, the first step is to make sure if we can see those veins. So not only do they usually stick out those little string fibers, right when you pick it from the ground, you'll see those strings, hopefully. Most of the time, it's kind of rare that you won't see them. A next step is on the back. So if this still has to do with the strings, that the back, you can see the strings sticking out. So early in the spring, you can sometimes find just when the frogleaf is starting to grow around February and March. If you're just looking in grass at a park, you might see sometimes plants that look almost like frogleaf when they're just really small. But then if you look on the back and you don't see those strings, then you can tell that that is not the one. That's not the plant you want. So definitely seeing those strings, even with a tall plantain, that's the front, and then that's the back. So you can still see those strong veins kind of sticking out on the back. And then the next way, this is more so focused on the round one, but so for the tall version, that you can see that they're very tall. In the summer, you can also see their seed pods for both plants, but I wanted to focus on the common plantain. This one is it's very easy to find. So for looking at when we're in need of the plant, it's usually where you would need it. So it could be on a field, or if you're hiking on a trail, or if you're even on a sidewalk. Often they can grow out of the sidewalk. So it does really grow everywhere. So it's really important. We'll get to the uses that you can think about using them on your own when you're outside. But the next part is that it's kind of actually shaped like a frog. So when I work with young school age groups, I tell the kids, put your imagination glasses or goggles on and pretend that you can see 2 eyes here and then the legs and arms, and you can kind of really see the shape of a frog's body. So when we're thinking about frog leaf, just thinking of that fun way that it kind of does look like a frog, the frog's body. So using the frog leaf, so now we have the 3 ways to make sure we have the right leaf. Is that we can take the frog leaf and the first step, so there's different ways you can use it. So the first one would be for like a sprain or swollen. So if you have a sprained ankle or you have swollen joints, or even a bruise or a burn, those are the ways that you would take the whole plant. And I'll do this one first because the other steps require chewing. So I'll do this step first. We have the entire plant. So let's say if I had a sprained wrist, what I could do, or swollen, you can take the leaves and you can wrap it around, and then you would hopefully be able to get a cloth and just damp it with water. And you can, the best, kind of the easiest way is to do this overnight. So you can leave it with a cold, damp cloth wrapped around there. So hopefully if you need to tie it or kind of keep it in place, and it can stay there, and it can help to, I guess if you want the explanation part, it's kind of an anti-inflammatory, so it will help to bring that swelling down. So that's one of the ways, is to have it kind of compressed. Another way, so this is if you have, that also goes for a scratch. If you have a big scratch, applying the frog leaf will help to heal, and it will basically stop the scar tissue from forming. So you're not having a large scar, it will heal quite easily. The other ways you can use this is for spider, mosquito, any kind of insect bites. They're very itchy, they're very kind of frustrating. So these are really great ways to heal. So a nickname for frog leaf is also called nature's Band-Aid. So that first way was for the spraining and swelling. The next way for bug bites, any kind of irritation, so rashes or eczema, different skin conditions, you can really use this quite easily. Similar with the raspberry leaf, if you want to dry them out, you can save them for later. Mostly easiest is for saving it for something, cooking a salve, kind of as an ointment for your skin. But using it fresh is the way that you want to have it for mosquitoes. So luckily they grow all summer long and right through mosquito season. So for that example is another time when I tell children, put your imagination glasses on, pretend there's a big cloud of mosquitoes, and then they bit your hand. So then you can see pretend there's a little bump on your hand. So taking the frog leaf, you want to make sure it's rinsed off first, but you would want to chew on it. So you chew on the frog leaf. And so many elders and different plant teachers said that having that saliva and chewing it and breaking it down, and then having that saliva when you're rubbing a mosquito bite is a large part. It's not just the plant, or just if you break it apart, it's not going to be quite as efficient. So once you're chewing on it and then rubbing it, so if it's a scratch, this is why you don't want to use it for this technique. You would want to just wrap it kind of as a Band-Aid idea. But with the mosquito bites, you're wanting to itch it, and it's very annoying. So then this can be also a little bit satisfying, that it's kind of like you're scratching the mosquito bite, but at the same time, it's also drying that the different toxins and different irritation out of your skin, as well as scratching it, and then you're drying those different chemicals that they use to, I don't know the technology of mosquito bites, but it's drying that irritation out of your skin. So it will help to bring the swelling down, and it will help to take that itchiness, the numbing part away. And it can really help your skin as well heal from the little bite as well. So in many ways, it's very beneficial. For mosquito bites, spider bites will bring the swelling down. It will help to really slow that down, and it's less just about anywhere outside, even sidewalks. So they're quite easy to find, and they're very, very beneficial. So it's really good to be able to know identifying it and then putting it to use. And so the next part for the dandelion. So there's a lot. I just have a flower of it. I didn't bring the entire plant. But I do encourage you for going out for the scavenger hunt, if you want to do that too, if you're able to, first identifying with the bright yellow flowers. So if we're talking about the doctrine of signatures, looking at the plant, thinking what in my body is yellow, what can yellow indicate also, not just what we have, but for the yellow indication. So often, again, I'll just share when I'm teaching with children, they really usually enjoy plantain and dandelion because they're easy to find. And these are ones that are kind of more fun. So they're usually younger kids will always giggle and they're like, pea is yellow in our body, or that's kind of a more silly one. And then of course teenagers will be like, I'm not saying anything, even though I know what the answer is. So, so with the yellow, not only is we're looking at, could be bile or urine, but also it can be an indication of illness in your body. So for an example, if we're looking at blowing your nose, if it's allergies, we're gonna see clear, or sorry, if it's just, whatever, runny nose and it's clear, then we're not worried. Usually if we blow our nose and it's more yellow color, then we can think of how our body is showing we're fighting an infection or cold or flu. So looking at how yellow can be that indicator in our body of how we can tell we need to take medicine, or looking at how we need to heal different parts of our body. Of course, yellow as well could be other toxins. So having that yellow color, plants with the yellow. Some plants are good for your urinary and digestion tract, or the kidney and liver as well, with bile, digestion. And some plants help to remove toxins with that yellow color. So at Maplewood Flats, if you're there around April, so right now we have our Oregon grape, which has the berries on there. They're a little tart. If you see Oregon grape in your neighborhood or garden, they are edible, but they're a little bit tart. But in around April, they have a bright yellow flower, so nice and bright and yellow like dandelions. And so that's an indication of a plant we have on the flats that is beneficial. And for many Coast Salish communities, as different illnesses were brought in, we have tuberculosis. That was one of the ways that Oregon grape was used to treat. That yellow color of the roots, not only flowers, but the roots of Oregon grape help to really fight off infection. So when we're looking at the dandelion, the entire plant is used. So this one is not indigenous. However, not all plants that are not indigenous, they're not all invasive. We do have many plants that were introduced, but they have many health benefits as well. And they're ones that are often kind of deemed of as a weed, or people would rather have grass instead of flowering or other varieties of plants. So this is one I do encourage to have, leave it alone, leave it for the bees, leave it for pollinators. This is not one that we have to use chemicals to poison and cut it down and get rid of it all the time. It's one that we should actually let keep growing. And so for the dandelion, we're looking at the flower. These are actually edible. You can kind of wash them because the ants or bugs might like to sit and live in there, but make sure you can wash it thoroughly like any other fresh produce or veggies and fruits. So you can eat them raw, or you can cook with it. Actually, when I was doing plant walks over the last few years within Maplewood Flats, it was shared with me that they were watching their neighbor, they were picking all the dandelions, and so she was saying, what do you do with them? And I think this lady was maybe like, she said she was like 102 years old. And so she was picking them, and she liked to stir fry the stems kind of with like butter and garlic. So it's edible. You can even online search up some recipes to cook with them. And so the flower, the stem, the leaves, and the roots, they can all be either in their own way eaten fresh, cooked, or dried for something like as a tea. So for the whole above the ground can be eaten pretty much raw. So if you go and have, even at a grocery store or anywhere you can find mixed green or baby greens or spring salad, you'll find the leaves of dandelions. They're a little bitter, so you would want to mix them with a little bit other different flavors of like lettuces or spinach and greens. And then this part, the stem, it's got kind of a white, kind of a milk on the inside, so you do want to cook it because it's more bitter. So add different flavors if you wish. So those ones are completely edible. And then in terms of we're looking at foraging, that is a nice way to also suggest that we have what are deemed of as a weed or an unwanted plant, of seeing kind of as a priority list. So if we're able to kind of forage or pick or gather more introduced plants, more in bigger quantities, and then very small scale individual small use of, if you're wanting to try and look at foraging or picking indigenous species, there's a lot of ways that we want to look first at what are animals that eat that berry or plant or mushroom kind of wild plant. How can we focus on something like frog leaf are also edible. You can eat them raw, not only use it for your skin or use it as a tea for your lungs. Oh, sorry, that's one point as well. I already chewed this a little, but you can see, if you can just imagine, it kind of looks similar to your lungs. They're really good for your respiratory system, so they are a good one. Sometimes in the spring for allergies, stinging nettle and frog leaf are two that are quite good for your lungs. So it's good if you have seasonal allergies, that can help kind of as an antihistamine, helping your lungs. So looking at how you can look at picking plants that are not at risk first, and having other ones, let's say like picking salmon berries as a very low priority, of allowing animals, birds, bears, different species to be having that as their way of eating, of course. Not only is everything above ground edible, so then we go down to the roots. So for the dandelion roots, you can pick those out, wash them down fully, and then you can chop them up into very small pieces. And so this even can be done in your own kitchen at home. So roasting them in the oven, you can then have the small little roasted up pieces of dandelion roots as a tea. It is more of a bitter flavor. So over the years, it's often sometimes nicknamed dandelion root coffee, because it's very much more of a bitter flavor a bit than leafy kind of green leafy teas. So the dandelion roots are very beneficial for digestive, and it is also been shown, there's kind of more research going into it as preventative, but also looking at how dandelions can be beneficial for your body for fighting cancer. So I kind of see campaigns of the daffodil month for cancer fighting cancer awareness, but I think that they should choose the dandelion, because it does actually have properties where it's good for your health, and it can be preventative, or it can be fighting against cancer cells in your body. So it's a really wonderful plant that we should not be cutting down or dumping poison on. It's one that we should celebrate, and we can use it, and it's also very celebrated by pollinators. The bees love the dandelion. So part of the scavenger hunt, you can take some time to sit in a grass patch if you're able to, and try to see if you can count any bees coming and landing and gathering nectar or interacting with the plant, or any other pollinators, if you can see any. So those are different notes that you can take for flowers, stems, leaves, and roots. So next we're going to be going to the red clover. So we don't as often use the white clover. They basically do look quite identical, really. So these ones I have, on occasion, people have asked me if it's called honeysuckle. Often as children, you may remember going and picking the little, you can pick these and you can eat them, or you can kind of suck the little sweet nectar out of there. So sometimes, yeah, they're kind of nicknamed honeysuckle, but that's a very different plant. But these are the red clover. So these can be very easily picked and dried as a tea, but it can also be used in different ways. Like I said, just kind of nibbling on it to kind of eat it like that. It's an edible. But then you can also, the ways you can save it if you dry it. It can be used externally for making salves. It can be beneficial, as I mentioned before, with the plantain or frog leaf. That's really good for your skin. The red clover is also really wonderful, that you can save it if you dry it out for salves. It can be mixed in for salve making. Sometimes people just pick one plant to use, but you can also, if you ever try making salve at home, you can do a big variety of plants that are all beneficial. Some of them might include, like I said, plantain with red clover and other different good for your skin plants. Even dandelion you can use in a salve as well. And so they dry very well. Some plants are kind of difficult, where you have to use dehydrators, you have to do a long process. Clovers are very simple. You can really just pick them and making sure that they're fully dry, but they don't really break down. They kind of stay solid. So you can even use the entire flower, a little bit of leaf, and then even a little bit of stem is perfectly fine when you're wanting to pick these. So if you want to go pick one and dry it out and see how it looks out, gotta give it a week. So using the red clover, these ones are really wonderful if you're looking at plants. It can help kind of detoxify in your body. So the red clover, it actually can help when you dry it out or even fresh as a tea. It helps to detach and kind of, I guess, not fully break down, but detach the sugar in your bloodstream. So if you or anyone you know has diabetes or has any health problems, or you're just drinking too much sugary things, if it's too hot and you have a Slurpee, I don't know. So when you have that red clover, it helps to detach and break down and remove the sugar from your bloodstream. So looking at detoxifying, so even with dandelion root, that can help to detoxify your digestive, and same with this one is another one that's good for clearing out your bloodstream and your digestive, helping to cleanse, I guess, if you like to put it that way. So our next plant, so the next one we will be, what I want you to do is to go and find, so later on, not at this moment, but go and look for a very tall cedar tree. And so one of the ways that we talk about cedar for the harvesting part, so I'm not sure if you can go to Stanley Park to see any, but, or even just looking online of photos of a culturally modified tree is usually a cedar. But it's a tree that has been, could have been hundreds or thousands of years ago. But if you can all, from wherever you're sitting, if you put your hands together with your thumbs touching, when we gather cedar bark, you never would take more than that width of the bark. So even it could be one hand. So you never want to take too much bark. When we're gathering, I was just going to show, this is a cedar weaving. So when we're looking at the very fine, small strips of cedar, just thinking about, it's a lot of work to process, but it's very beautiful. So the tree of life, the cedar tree, we use it for clothing and hats all year round. We have our transportation of different types of canoes for the Squam within this area, Scahomish and Hunkaminam speaking. We roughly have about 7 different varieties of canoes, all from the red cedar tree. And we have different ways of our housing, of our long houses, that we use the cedar tree in that way. So when thinking about the tree of life, there's so many different ways that we have a respectful and a very deep connection and relationship to the cedar tree. It's never taken for granted. We always thank, and we always have different ways of that spiritual connection. But I did read a book written by an anthropologist in the Pacific Northwest about the relationship of the tree. And it was really wonderful drawings and details and histories. But one word from the whole book just struck me wrong as a non-Indigenous person explaining this relationship. It was written that the whole tree was exploited, meaning every part can of not understanding, having Indigenous people explain our relationship rather than it being told on behalf of us. So we never had that disrespect of the cedar. It's a very spiritual relation that we don't exploit it. We just know every part has a use, but just thinking of that one word can change depending on how you're describing it. So those are just ways of looking at the bark for hats. So there's many different ways. And another reason we use, when we're talking about cedar, using our hands, if you ever, if you've seen an event, or there's different ways when you see, for Coast Salish cultures, when you have hands raised up like this, we're saying Haichka, or the different dialect of the nations. But Sometimes people say OCM or other words, but usually Haichka or Hoichika are more of a thank you. And so we're always, even if you pick a plant, even just saying thank you in your own language or saying Haichka, we do believe plants listen. So we have that connection. Even sometimes people, instead of leaving an offering, some people leave a tobacco offering. That is in different indigenous groups. Coast Salish don't always leave tobacco. Maybe something that has, my mom and I kind of brainstorm about sharing about people, if you want to pick, how can you give back that reciprocity to the land? So singing or speaking to the plant is really wonderful. Also, if you can save, or even if you want to purchase wild seeds, wildflowers, if you ever pick berries or pick a piece of a plant, how can you leave seeds, or how can you give back and not seeing it as free for all for you to just take and take? How can we maybe save clovers or save flowers, and how can you leave something where you took and give thanks to the plant for taking and giving? The give and take reciprocity idea is really something to think a bit deeper into. How can you give back to plants as well? One of the plants these are ones I just picked in my neighborhood, in my area. So with the sword fern. So there's many different ferns. We have had some posts recently on our social media looking at ferns, looking at the indigenous dialects and languages, the Hunkaminam and Skohomish languages. So this one, as you can tell, they are very large. You can't even fit it in the whole screen. So sword fern, they're great, and they're edible in the springtime for the sword ferns, but they have to be cooked. So one of the ways when we're looking at textures, which is a fun one with the sword fern, if you can, hopefully that's in focus, if you can see those little fuzzy brown, so those are actually spores. And so the spores on the sword fern, you can kind of see they're like the seed part of them. And then the other fern, so this one, I believe it is the wood fern. So this one's very small. They can get a bit bigger, but in comparison, they're really not ever big as the sword. The sword fern is very much larger. So these ones only, with sword fern, almost all of the fronds on the plant, you will always see, pretty much all of them will have those little spore seeds. But with the smaller ferns, you maybe only half the time, just on my observation, it could be different. But most of the time you don't always see the spores on every single plant. So that's just showing that this one, you can't really see those fuzzy spores on each frond or kind of each branch. And so the different bracken fern and the wood fern, those are ones that you are more often, they can be eaten raw in the springtime when it's the fiddlehead. So the fiddlehead, of course, right now it's right full blast summertime right now, so you wouldn't see that the fiddleheads in this time of year, but they would be very tiny. So these ones would be much more delicate, and they're kind of eaten fresh by animals or humans alike. These ones would be more often cooked or dried, so you can, one of the ways people would preserve them to kind of dehydrate and then cook them in like a stew in the winter. So those are looking at some of the different ferns, and there's also ways that they were used as for cooking in a steam pit to preserve them, help food. And then one of the last ones, so when we're looking at the topic of invasive species, if you have the time or the ability to be pulling out plants, the Himalayan blackberry, and then this one, we've got different varieties. So this is the morning glory, the flower, and then a leaf of it. So if you're looking at different ivies, English ivy, morning glory, these are plants that will really wrap around, and then they can often sometimes even suffocate or overgrow over different plant varieties or even trees. So looking at ways that we can identify those invasives. So if you want to look at, if you're walking, the next time you're walking in your neighborhood or in a green setting, so a hike or within Maplewood Flats, just from a simple scan, if you can look and just with your eyes, just within the first 2 minutes, try to identify if there's an area where you can see that these invasive plants are growing. And sometimes you can even see trees where they grow, even if you're driving on a highway and you just look off to the side for a second, if there's a tree line, and you can even see trees where the invasives are going all the way up a gigantic tall tree. So these are definitely ones, as much as we can. It's just that amount of labor. Often it's hard for me to try to give any recommendations of ways of anything other than really pulling them. So it's hard to say that any kind of planticide will not have a negative impact on the ecosystem to other plants. So unfortunately, these are ones we can try to put chemicals or this and that, but in the end of the day, they are very determined to grow back, or cuttings could even grow more. So if you're removing them, make sure you can try to have it collected by the compost or green bin kind of thing as soon as possible, so they will grow back. If you have a pile of cuttings, they can sometimes start to just regrow from there. So looking at the different invasives, identifying if you can see them growing, and then look at ways if you can help remove them if it's your yard or a community garden that you're a part of. Those are different ways that we want to really, sometimes people enjoy the prettiness of the flower. I don't know the entire relationship with pollinators, but it's definitely one that can have a negative impact, especially on smaller plants or even very large trees. So definitely that's one we want to not encourage growing, want to remove it and stop the growing of those ones there. So yeah, again, this one is morning glory, but that can also include ivies as well. So if you do have questions, you can put it in the comment section, or you can go onto our social media. So I'm watching this on my Zoom, so I'm not looking at Facebook Live comments. So I don't know if there's comments of questions on there as well. But I do want to thank you all. Say hi, Chika. Thank you for coming to join. I should be able to share my PDF question sheets onto social media. If you would like to screenshot, take a photo, or I know if you can click on the link in the Zoom chat that you should be able to download it, if I'm correct. And so just ways that you can, if you're able to take notes today, or we can look at the document just to fill in blank notes if you want to take that scavenger hunt to try it today out on the land instead of viewing it from the screen. I did not place photos in the PDF, but I do encourage, part of the last part of the activity is to just take a sketch. So don't put yourself down. Don't say you're bad at drawing. Just give it a try. Just let your childhood creative pencil or pen in hand and just look at the plant and try to, it's not about an art contest of making it look the perfect way. It's more about looking at the different shapes, textures, and familiarizing your own self relationship to a plant. So if you want to look at the different ways of looking at a fern, that different textures in there. So don't put pressure on yourself to make it look the most beautiful art, because it's more about that, the textures and looking at the plant itself. So thank you, everybody. And so I'm glad we were able to have people join in. And so I will try to check on the Facebook live stream after this ends. And so hopefully in the comments, if you're on Facebook as well, that I can try to answer any questions that are on there. And so again, before we end, if you want to click on the chat and download the PDF, I believe you can do that. Otherwise, you can at least open and then try to save it to your computer or save it to your device. So yes, thank you all. I'm